The great halls of Hartwell House glittered with all the splendor expected of the season's first grand ball. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light over a sea of silk and satin, while London's most distinguished families mingled beneath the music of violins and murmured laughter. Every rustle of a gown, every polished smile, every graceful turn upon the marble floor spoke of wealth, ambition, and whispered hopes yet to unfold. Adele Fraser stood near one of the tall windows that overlooked the torchlit gardens, her gloved hands clasped loosely before her. She wore a gown of pale blue silk, modest by the standards of London's more fashionable young ladies, but it suited her well. Her dark hair was arranged simply with a few curls framing her face, and her brown eyes held an intelligence that often made the more frivolous members of society uncomfortable. She had not wished to attend this ball. Her father, Magistrate Edmund Fraser, had insisted, believing that a season in London would provide his daughter with opportunities unavailable in their provincial home of Derbyshire. Adele had reluctantly agreed, though she found the endless parade of superficial conversations and practiced flirtations exhausting. "Miss Fraser, you look positively riveting standing there like a statue," came a familiar voice. Adele turned to see her friend, Caroline Huxley, approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Here, sustain yourself. The evening is still young, and who knows, perhaps some gentleman will sweep you off your feet." Adele accepted the glass with a small smile. "I think my feet are quite content where they are, thank you." Caroline laughed, her blonde ringlets bouncing. "You are impossible, but I do wish you would make more of an effort. There are several eligible gentlemen here tonight, including," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "the Duke of Westfield." Adele's expression remained neutral, though she had indeed noticed the Duke's arrival. It would have been impossible not to. Jamie Archer, the Duke of Westfield, was a figure who commanded attention simply by existing. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he wore slightly longer than current fashion dictated, and features that would have been handsome if not for the perpetual expression of aristocratic disdain that seemed etched upon them. He was also, according to London gossip, the most eligible bachelor of the season and the most impossible to please. "I have no interest in the Duke of Westfield," Adele said quietly. "No one asked if you had interest," Caroline replied with a grin. "I merely noted his presence, though I confess I find him rather intimidating. They say he reduced Lady Pemberton's daughter to tears last season with a single cutting remark about her pianoforte playing." "Then he is not a gentleman," Adele said firmly. "A true gentleman would never deliberately cause distress to a lady, regardless of her musical abilities." Caroline was about to respond when a stir near the entrance drew their attention. The Duke of Westfield had moved into the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a small crowd of admirers and acquaintances. His voice, rich and carrying, rose above the general noise. "I tell you, Harrison, the entire institution of marriage is vastly overrated," he was saying to a portly gentleman at his elbow. "My father pestered me endlessly about securing an heir before his death, and now my aunt continues the campaign with renewed vigor. But I refuse to shackle myself to some simpering debutante whose only accomplishment is batting her eyelashes." Several people laughed, though the sound held an edge of nervousness. The Duke's reputation for sharp wit was well established, and no one wished to become its target. Lord Harrison, emboldened by champagne, pressed on. "Surely there must be someone in London who meets your exacting standards, Your Grace. What of the Whitmore girl? She's considered quite the beauty." "Beautiful, yes," the Duke conceded, "but with the intellectual capacity of a decorative cushion. I had the misfortune of attempting conversation with her last week. She believed the Lake District to be somewhere in Scotland." More laughter rippled through the group. Adele felt her jaw tighten. She did not know Miss Whitmore personally, but the public mockery seemed unnecessarily cruel. "What about Miss Fraser, then?" another voice called out. Adele's blood ran cold. She recognized the speaker as Lord Cunningham, a spiteful young man known for stirring trouble. "The magistrate's daughter. I understand she's quite accomplished, speaks 3 languages, and has read more books than most of us combined." Adele saw Caroline's eyes widen in alarm. They were standing close enough to hear every word clearly, and several people in the crowd had already glanced in their direction. The Duke of Westfield turned, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Adele. For a moment their eyes met. His were a striking shade of grey, like storm clouds, and something flickered in their depths, something quickly suppressed. Miss Fraser? He said her name as though testing its weight. Ah, yes, the provincial bluestocking. His lips curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. I'm sure she's very accomplished at organizing her father's law books and correcting everyone's grammar. But as for being wife material, he paused and the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. I can say with absolute certainty that she would be the last woman I would ever consider marrying. I prefer a wife who understands the social graces, not one who treats every conversation as though it were a lecture hall. Besides, a duke must marry within his own class. One cannot build a dynasty on middle-class respectability, no matter how many books she's read. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, as if on cue, nervous laughter erupted from various corners of the room. Adele felt as though she had been struck. The humiliation was so profound, so absolute, that for several seconds she could not move, could not breathe. Caroline's hand gripped her arm. Adele, don't... But Adele had already set down her glass. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and walked toward the ballroom's exit. She did not run, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. She kept her head high, her steps measured, even as she felt dozens of pairs of eyes boring into her back. She heard whispers following her like a malicious wind. How mortifying, poor girl. Well, she should have known better than to set her cap at a duke. Adele made it to the hallway before the tears began to burn behind her eyes. She found a small alcove behind a marble pillar and pressed herself into the shadows, fighting for composure. How dare he? How dare he humiliate her so publicly, so cruelly? She had never sought his attention, never given him any reason to single her out for such treatment. The injustice of it made her hands shake with rage. She had thought him handsome once, in an abstract way. She had even felt a flutter of something unfamiliar when their paths had crossed briefly at a museum 2 months earlier. He had been studying a Roman sculpture, and she had been sketching it in her journal. Their conversation had been brief but surprisingly engaging. He had demonstrated actual knowledge of classical history, and his questions about her drawings had seemed genuinely interested rather than merely polite. She had allowed herself for just a moment to think that perhaps beneath the aristocratic armor was someone interesting, someone real. What a fool she had been. Miss Fraser. Adele stiffened. She recognized the voice of Lady Catherine Worthing, a kind-hearted older woman who had befriended her father years ago. My dear girl, please don't let that insufferable man upset you, Lady Catherine said gently, appearing beside her in the alcove. The Duke of Westfield has always been too clever for his own good, and too proud by half. His words say far more about his character than yours. I want to go home, Adele whispered. Of course. I'll have my carriage brought around immediately. And Adele, Lady Catherine touched her arm lightly. You are worth 10 of him. Do not forget that. But as Adele was escorted from Hartley House and helped into Lady Catherine's carriage, she could not shake the echo of the Duke's words, could not forget the casual cruelty in his eyes as he had pronounced her unworthy. She made a silent vow as the carriage rolled through London's gas-lit streets. She would never, ever forgive Jamie Archer, and she would certainly never speak to him again. What Adele did not see because she had already left was the Duke of Westfield standing alone on the ballroom's terrace 20 minutes later, gripping the stone balustrade with white-knuckled hands. What she did not know was that his eyes were closed, his jaw clenched, and that he was silently cursing himself for being every kind of fool. What she could not have guessed was that he had spent the past 2 months trying desperately to forget the way she had looked up from her sketchbook in that museum, the way intelligence and curiosity had danced in her eyes, the way his heart had done something strange and unprecedented when she had smiled at him. And what she absolutely could not have imagined was that Jamie Archer, Duke of Westfield, had just destroyed the one thing he wanted most in the world, because he was terrified of how much he wanted it. 3 months had passed since the disaster at Hartley House. Adele had returned to Derbyshire with her father, relieved to escape London's poisonous gossip and pitying glances. The story of her public humiliation had spread through society like wildfire, and she had no desire to provide further entertainment for the ton. Back home in the solid grey stone house where she had grown up, Adele tried to rebuild her composure. She threw herself into her studies, helped her father with his legal correspondence, and took long walks across the moors where the wind scoured away the memory of that terrible night. Almost. She told herself, She had forgotten Jamie Archer. She told herself his words no longer had the power to wound her. She told herself that the strange, hollow ache in her chest had nothing to do with him at all. She was lying, of course, but it was a necessary lie, one that allowed her to function, to smile at her father across the breakfast table, to respond politely when neighbours asked about her abbreviated London season. It was late August when the letter arrived. Adele was in her father's study, organising a stack of case files, when Mrs. Pickering, their housekeeper, entered with a troubled expression. "Miss Fraser, there's a messenger here from London. From Greystone Manor, he says. He's asking for you specifically." Adele's hands stilled on the documents. Greystone Manor. She knew that name. It was the primary estate of the Duke of Westfield. "Tell him I am not receiving visitors," she said coldly. "He says it's urgent, miss. A matter of life and death." Something in Mrs. Pickering's tone made Adele look up sharply. The older woman's face was genuinely concerned. "Send him in," Adele said reluctantly. The messenger was a young man in dusty travelling clothes, clearly exhausted from hard riding. He bowed quickly. "Miss Fraser, forgive the intrusion. I come from Greystone Manor on behalf of Lady Beatrice Worthing, the Duke of Westfield's aunt. His Grace has fallen gravely ill with a violent fever. The physicians fear for his life." He paused, seeming uncertain how to continue. "During his delirium, His Grace has been calling out for you, miss, repeatedly. Lady Beatrice believes your presence might provide some comfort, or perhaps help him fight the illness." Adele stared at the man as though he had spoken in a foreign language. "I don't understand. Why would the Duke call for me? We are barely acquainted." The messenger shifted uncomfortably. "I cannot say, miss. I only know that Lady Beatrice was most insistent that I find you. She said the Duke has been crying out your name every night for the past week. The servants say they've never seen anything like it." Adele's mind reeled. This made no sense. The man who had publicly declared her beneath his consideration was now in his fevered state calling for her. It had to be some kind of cruel joke. "Please convey my regards to Lady Beatrice," Adele said carefully. "But I cannot possibly—" "Miss Fraser." The messenger's voice was urgent. "I have been riding for 2 days straight on Lady Beatrice's orders. She made me swear I would not return without you. She believes you are the Duke's only hope." "That is absurd," Adele said sharply. "I am no physician. I have no medical training. My presence would accomplish nothing." But even as she spoke, she felt the pull of something she could not name. Curiosity, concern, or perhaps something more dangerous, the remnant of that foolish flutter she had felt in the museum, before she had learned how thoroughly Jamie Archer despised everything she represented. "Please, miss," the messenger said quietly. "Whatever passed between you and His Grace, he is dying. Lady Beatrice says you are a compassionate woman. She is begging you to come." Adele closed her eyes. She thought of that terrible night at Hartley House. She thought of the humiliation, the casual cruelty, the way he had reduced her to nothing in front of all of London. She should refuse. She should send this messenger away and forget that Jamie Archer had ever existed. But she also thought of a man delirious with fever, calling out for someone who might bring him peace, and despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger, she found she could not ignore such a plea. "I need to speak with my father," she said finally. Magistrate Fraser was not pleased with his daughter's decision, but he understood it. Edmund Fraser had built his career on principles of justice and mercy, and he recognized both in Adele's choice. "If you are determined to go, I will accompany you," he insisted. "No, father. You have the assizes next week. These cases cannot be delayed." Adele placed her hand over his. "I will take Mrs. Pickering as chaperone. We will stay only long enough to do whatever can be done. Then I will return home. The man who humiliated you publicly is now asking for your charity," her father said quietly. "You owe him nothing, Adele." "I know," she replied, "but perhaps I owe myself the knowledge that I am better than he is, that I can show compassion even when it is not deserved." Her father studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "You have more strength than I did at your age." "Very well, but I want word from you every day. And if anything at all makes you uncomfortable, you leave immediately. I promise." 2 hours later, Adele found herself in a well-appointed carriage bearing the Westfield crest, racing south toward Greystone Manor. Mrs. Pickering sat across from her, alternately dozing and muttering about the impropriety of the entire situation. Adele stared out the window at the passing countryside and tried to calm the storm of emotions warring within her. She was about to see Jamie Archer again. The man who had wounded her so deeply. The man who was now, for reasons she could not fathom, crying out for her in his fever dreams. What would she find at Greystone Manor? And more importantly, what would she do when she got there? The answer, she told herself firmly, was simple. She would do her duty as a compassionate human being. She would offer whatever comfort she could to a sick man, and then she would leave and never think of Jamie Archer again. It was a sensible plan. But as the carriage rolled on through the late summer twilight, Adele found herself gripping the edge of her seat and wondering why her heart was beating so very fast. They arrived at Greystone Manor after dark on the second day of travel. The estate was larger than Adele had imagined, a sprawling stone edifice set against rolling parkland. Even in the darkness, she could see it was magnificent, ancient and proud, like the man who owned it. Lady Beatrice Worthing met them in the entrance hall, a handsome woman in her 50s with worried eyes and greying hair. She embraced Adele as though they were old friends, though they had met only once before, briefly at a charity function. "Thank goodness you've come," Lady Beatrice said fervently. "I wasn't certain you would after everything, but I had to try. The physicians are losing hope, Miss Fraser. They say the fever should have broken by now. But Jamie just grows worse and he won't stop calling for you." "May I see him?" Adele asked, surprising herself with the question. Lady Beatrice nodded and led her up the grand staircase, through corridors lined with portraits of Archer ancestors who stared down with varying degrees of aristocratic disapproval. Finally, they reached a set of double doors. "I must warn you," Lady Beatrice said quietly. "He looks diminished. Jamie has always been so strong, so vital. To see him like this—" Her voice broke slightly. Adele felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the older woman. Whatever Jamie Archer's faults, he was clearly loved by his aunt. Lady Beatrice opened the doors, and Adele stepped into a large bedroom dominated by a massive four-poster bed. The room was warm, too warm, and smelled of illness and medicinal herbs. Several candles provided soft light, and a fire burned in the grate despite the summer heat. In the bed lay Jamie Archer, and Adele's breath caught. Lady Beatrice had been right. He looked diminished. The arrogant duke who had commanded every room he entered now lay motionless, his skin pale and damp with sweat. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. A physician sat in a chair near the bed, monitoring his patient with a grave expression. "Any change, Dr. Thornbury?" Lady Beatrice asked. The elderly physician shook his head. "The fever remains high. I've tried every treatment I know. Willow bark tea, cold compresses, bloodletting. Nothing brings it down for long. If it doesn't break soon—" He didn't finish the sentence. As if in response to their voices, Jamie stirred. His head turned restlessly on the pillow, and a low sound escaped his lips. "Adele." The word was barely audible, more breath than voice, but it was unmistakable. Adele found herself moving closer to the bed without conscious decision. She looked down at the man who had caused her such pain and felt a confusing tangle of emotions. Anger, certainly, but also something softer, something that felt dangerously like concern. "Adele, please." His voice was raw, desperate. "I'm sorry. So sorry." Lady Beatrice placed a hand on Adele's arm. "This is what he's been saying for days. We don't understand it. He rambles about a ballroom, about cruel words, about being a fool. None of us know what he means." But Adele knew. She understood perfectly. Jamie's eyes opened suddenly, though they were glassy and unfocused. "Adele," he said again, and this time his hand moved weakly across the coverlet, as though reaching for something. Don't leave. Please don't leave me. I can't lose you again. I never shouldn't have said." His words dissolved into incoherent mumbling, and his eyes closed once more. Dr. Thornbury stood and approached Lady Beatrice. "I believe the young lady's presence may indeed be beneficial," he said quietly. "I've seen cases where a familiar voice, a meaningful connection, can sometimes reach a patient when medicine cannot. If Miss Fraser is willing to sit with him, to speak to him, It might help anchor him through the delirium. All eyes turned to Adele. She should refuse. Every ounce of common sense screamed at her to walk away, to return to Derbyshire, and forget this entire strange episode. But she found herself nodding. "I'll stay," she said. "If it might help, I'll stay." Lady Beatrice's relief was palpable. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll have a room prepared for you immediately." "No," Adele said, still looking at the restless figure in the bed. "I'll stay here. If my presence brings him any comfort, then I should remain close." And so Adele Fraser, the woman whom Jamie Archer had declared the last woman he would ever marry, settled into a chair beside his bed and prepared to fight for his life. The first night was the longest of Adele's life. Mrs. Pickering had been given a comfortable room down the hall, but insisted on checking on Adele every few hours. Lady Beatrice drifted in and out, bringing tea and encouragement. Dr. Thornbury remained on the estate, sleeping in short bursts in an adjacent room in case he was needed urgently. But it was Adele who maintained the true vigil. She sat in the chair that had been moved close to Jamie's bedside, watching his face by candlelight, listening to his labored breathing. The fever made him restless. He tossed and turned, throwing off blankets that she patiently replaced, muttering words she could not always distinguish. But her name was clear. Over and over he called for her. "Adele, forgive me, please." At first she said nothing in response. She simply sat there, wrestling with the conflicting emotions that his condition aroused in her. This was the man who had humiliated her. Why should his fevered apologies mean anything? But as the hours crept by as she watched him suffer, something inside her began to shift. Around 2 in the morning, during a particularly bad spell when his fever seemed to spike even higher, Adele found herself leaning forward and placing her hand over his where it clutched at the sheets. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm here, Jamie. You're not alone." The effect was immediate. His restless movements stilled. His breathing, while still rapid, became more regular. His fingers curled weakly around hers. "Don't go," he murmured. "Please, don't go." "I won't," Adele heard herself promise. "I'll stay." And she did. As dawn began to grey the windows, Dr. Thornbury came in to check on his patient. He looked at their joined hands but said nothing, simply felt Jamie's pulse and forehead before nodding with cautious approval. "The fever hasn't broken, but it hasn't worsened either. That's something. Keep doing whatever you're doing, Miss Fraser. I believe it's helping." When Lady Beatrice arrived an hour later with breakfast, she found Adele still holding Jamie's hand, though Adele herself had dozed off in the chair, her head resting on the edge of the mattress. "Poor dear," Lady Beatrice murmured to Mrs. Pickering. "She's exhausted herself." "Miss Adele has always had a tender heart," Mrs. Pickering replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely pleased that this particular quality was being exercised on behalf of the Duke of Westfield. Adele woke to find pale sunlight streaming through the windows, and Lady Beatrice pressing a cup of tea into her free hand. Her back ached from the awkward position, and her neck was stiff, but Jamie's hand was still warm in hers. "You should rest properly," Lady Beatrice urged. "You'll be no good to anyone if you make yourself ill." "I'm fine," Adele insisted, though her voice was hoarse with fatigue. "Has there been any change?" "Not yet. But Dr. Thornbury says your presence is definitely helping. He's never seen Jamie so calm during a fever episode." Lady Beatrice paused, then added gently, "May I ask you something, my dear?" Adele nodded. "What happened between you and my nephew? I know there's more to this story than I've been told. The servants whisper about some incident in London, but no one will speak plainly." Adele was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "Your nephew made his opinion of me quite clear at a London ball 3 months ago. He declared publicly that I would be the last woman he would ever consider marrying." Lady Beatrice's face went pale. "Oh, my dear girl, I had no idea. How utterly horrible." "Yes," Adele agreed simply. "It was. But then why?" Lady Beatrice gestured helplessly at the scene before them. Adele maintaining her vigil, Jamie clinging to her hand even in his unconscious state. "I don't know," Adele admitted. "Truly, I don't understand any of this. Why he would call for me. Why I would come. Why I cannot seem to make myself leave now that I'm here." Lady Beatrice studied her thoughtfully. "May I tell you something about my nephew? Something that might help you understand him better?" "If you wish." The older woman settled into another chair and folded her hands in her lap. Jamie's father, my brother, was a hard man, brilliant, powerful, but cold as winter frost. He raised Jamie to believe that emotion was weakness, that caring for anyone or anything was a vulnerability to be exploited. When Jamie was 15, he formed an attachment to a young woman from the village, the daughter of our rector. It was innocent, puppy love really. But when my brother discovered it, he was furious. He sent the girl's family away with barely enough money to survive, and he told Jamie that attachments to those beneath his station would only bring shame to the Archer name. Adele felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's terrible. Indeed, but it worked. Jamie learned to guard his heart, to present only arrogance and indifference to the world. It has made him successful in business and politics. It has also made him profoundly lonely. Lady Beatrice's eyes were sad. I've watched him for years, hoping he would find someone who could break through those walls he's built. And then he came back from a museum visit 2 months before the season began, and he was different, distracted, almost happy, though he tried to hide it. I asked him what had happened, and he mentioned meeting a young woman who shared his interest in Roman history. He said she was extraordinary. Adele's breath caught. He said that? Yes. But the next time I brought it up, he grew angry and changed the subject. And then, during the season, I heard about the incident at Hartley House. Lady Beatrice reached over and placed her hand over both of theirs. I think, my dear, that my nephew is a coward. I think he met you and felt something he had been taught to fear, and rather than embrace it, he tried to destroy it in the cruelest way possible. That doesn't excuse his behavior, Adele said firmly. No, Lady Beatrice agreed. It doesn't, but it might explain it. They sat in silence for a while, listening to Jamie's breathing. Then Lady Beatrice rose. I'll have food sent up for you, and please do rest when you can. Whatever my nephew has done, he doesn't deserve your death from exhaustion on his conscience. After she left, Adele looked down at Jamie's face. Even in illness he was handsome. Strong features, a firm jaw, dark lashes that rested against his pale cheeks. She remembered how he had looked that day in the museum, how his eyes had lit up when she had corrected his translation of a Latin inscription. She had thought, just for a moment, that she had seen the real Jamie Archer that day. Not the arrogant duke, but a man who loved learning as much as she did. A man who might understand her. You're a fool, she whispered to his unconscious form. And so am I, apparently. As if in answer, his hand tightened slightly around hers. The second day passed much like the first, though Adele forced herself to take short breaks to eat and stretch her cramped muscles. She also began to speak to Jamie more deliberately, though she wasn't certain he could hear her. She read to him from a book of poetry Lady Beatrice had provided. She described the view from his window, rolling hills and carefully maintained gardens. She even, in a fit of either bravery or madness, told him about her life in Derbyshire. My father says I should have more friends my own age, she said, as afternoon sunlight slanted across the bed. But I've never been very good at the sort of conversations most young women seem to enjoy. I don't care about fashion or gossip. I care about ideas, about history, about understanding how the world works. That makes me strange, I suppose. Certainly it made me a target in London. She paused, swallowing the bitterness that rose in her throat at the memory. You made me feel like there was something wrong with me, she continued quietly. Something shameful about being who I am. That's what hurt the most, I think. Not just the public humiliation, but the idea that you, of all people, found me contemptible. I thought you might understand me. After the museum, I thought... She shook her head. It doesn't matter what I thought. Jamie stirred, and for a moment his eyes opened, truly opened, with something like awareness in them. Adele? His voice was a dry whisper. Her heart jumped. I'm here. Real? Are you real? Yes, I'm real. His eyes tried to focus on her face. I'm sorry, he said, the words barely audible. So sorry. Said terrible things. Didn't mean... Hush, Adele said, though her own voice was unsteady. Save your strength. Couldn't bear it. If you hated me... His eyes began to close again. Loved you. From that first day. But I was afraid. Then consciousness left him once more, and Adele was left staring at his still face, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Had she imagined those words? Had he really said he loved her? No, she must have misheard. It was fever talk, nothing more, the ravings of a sick mind. But her hand trembled as she reached up to brush a strand of damp hair from his forehead. "You're making this very difficult," she whispered. On the third night, the fever broke. It happened just before dawn. Adele had been dozing fitfully in her chair when Jamie suddenly cried out. Not her name this time, but a wordless sound of distress. She jerked awake to find him thrashing, his skin burning hot, his breath coming in desperate gasps. "Dr. Thornbury," she shouted, but the physician was already there, Lady Beatrice close behind him. "The fever is spiking," Dr. Thornbury said grimly. "This is the crisis point. He'll either break through it or—" He didn't finish. "No," Adele said fiercely. She gripped Jamie's hand with both of hers and leaned close to his ear. "Jamie Archer, you listen to me. You are not going to die. Do you hear me? You don't get to say those things to me and then leave. You owe me better than that. You owe me the chance to decide whether I can ever forgive you. So you will fight. Do you understand? You will fight." She didn't know if he could hear her, but she kept talking, kept holding his hand, kept anchoring him to life with the sheer force of her will. Lady Beatrice was praying quietly. Dr. Thornbury was applying cold compresses. Mrs. Pickering had appeared in her nightdress and was hovering anxiously by the door, and Adele held on. Minutes passed like hours. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, Jamie's thrashing began to ease. His breathing, while still labored, became more regular. The terrible heat of his skin began to lessen. Dr. Thornbury placed his hand on Jamie's forehead and let out a long, shuddering breath. "The fever is breaking," he said, wonder in his voice. "Merciful heavens, it's actually breaking." Lady Beatrice burst into tears of relief. Mrs. Pickering sagged against the doorframe, and Adele, still holding Jamie's hand, felt something inside her chest crack open. He was going to live. The insufferable, arrogant, heartbreaking man was going to live, and she was going to have to figure out what that meant for both of them. Jamie Archer woke slowly, swimming up through layers of confusion and disorientation. For several long moments, he didn't know where he was or what had happened. He only knew that his body felt weak, his mouth tasted terrible, and someone was holding his hand. He turned his head carefully, even that small movement required effort, and found himself looking at Adele Fraser. She was asleep in a chair pulled close to his bed, her head resting on her folded arms on the edge of the mattress. Her dark hair had come partially loose from its pins and fell across her face. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes, her skin pale, and she was holding his hand. Memory came rushing back in fragmented pieces, the fever, the delirium, calling out for her over and over. And then she had come. She had actually come. "Good morning, Your Grace." Jamie's gaze shifted to find Dr. Thornbury entering the room. The elderly physician smiled at the sight of him awake. "How do you feel?" Dr. Thornbury asked quietly, clearly trying not to wake Adele. "Like I've been trampled by horses," Jamie croaked. His voice sounded wrong, rough and weak. "Not far from the truth, I'd say. You've been very ill, but the worst is past now, thanks in no small part to this young lady." He nodded toward Adele. "She's barely left your side for 3 days. 3 days. Jamie stared at Adele's sleeping face, trying to process this information. Why would she do that? After what he'd said to her, why would she come at all, let alone stay? "I'll fetch your aunt," Dr. Thornbury said. "She'll be overjoyed to see you conscious. But first, you should know, Miss Fraser will likely be mortified to be found like this. Perhaps we might give her a moment to wake naturally." Jamie nodded, grateful for the physician's discretion. After Dr. Thornbury left, he lay still, gathering his strength and watching Adele sleep. She was beautiful. He had known that from the first moment he saw her in the museum, sketching with complete absorption, utterly unaware of her surroundings. She had been beautiful then, and she was beautiful now, even exhausted and rumpled from her vigil. And he had hurt her, deliberately, viciously. The memory of that night at Hartley House made him close his eyes in shame. He could see it so clearly, the way she had held herself with dignity even as he destroyed her. The way she had walked away, head high, while London's elite whispered and laughed. He had done that to her. He had taken something precious, that moment of connection they had shared in the museum, and crushed it because he was too much of a coward to acknowledge what it meant. He was in love with Adele Fraser. He had been since that first conversation about Roman emperors and the fall of republics. And the thought of that love, of needing anyone that much, of giving someone that kind of power over him, had terrified him so completely that he had tried to destroy it before it could destroy him. But she had come anyway. When he was dying, she had come. Adele stirred, made a small sound of discomfort, and began to wake. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she looked disoriented. Then her gaze met his, and she went very still. "You're awake," she said unnecessarily. "Yes," he replied, his voice still rough. "Thanks to you, I understand." Colour flooded her cheeks, and she quickly sat up, releasing his hand and smoothing her hair with nervous fingers. "Dr. Thornbury and your aunt did far more than I did." "That's not what Dr. Thornbury told me." An awkward silence fell between them. Adele looked anywhere but at him, clearly uncomfortable now that he was conscious and aware. "You should rest," she said finally, rising from her chair. "I'll tell Lady Beatrice that you're awake." "Adele, wait." He tried to sit up, but his body betrayed him. The effort made his head spin, and he fell back against the pillows with a gasp. "For heaven's sake, don't be foolish," Adele said sharply, moving back to his side. "You've been gravely ill. You need to recover." "I need to talk to you." "No, you need to rest." "Adele, please." "I did not come here so you could thank me," she said, and there was an edge of steel in her voice now. "I came because I was told you were dying and calling for me. I came because, despite everything, I am not cruel enough to let even you suffer alone. But that doesn't mean I've forgiven you. And it certainly doesn't mean I want to have a conversation while you're barely conscious." Jamie looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth. She was still angry, still hurt. The vigil at his bedside didn't erase what he had done. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. You should rest. You look exhausted." Something flickered in her eyes at that. Surprise, perhaps, that he had noticed, but she simply nodded and moved toward the door. "Adele?" She paused but didn't turn around. "Thank you," he said, "for coming, for staying. I don't deserve it, but thank you." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't respond. Then, without looking back, she said, "You're right. You don't deserve it." And she left. Over the next few days, Jamie gradually regained his strength. Lady Beatrice was a constant presence, as was Dr. Thornbury, who monitored his recovery with the eye of a man who hadn't quite believed his patient would survive. Adele, however, kept her distance. She had moved to a guest room on another wing of the house. Lady Beatrice reported that she was well and resting, but she did not visit Jamie's room. He saw her only once from his window, walking in the garden with Mrs. Pickering. She looked up at the house, whether deliberately or by chance he couldn't tell, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. Then she turned away. "You're brooding," Lady Beatrice observed on the 4th day of his recovery. She was sitting in the chair Adele had occupied, embroidering something that might have been a handkerchief. "I'm convalescing," Jamie corrected. "You're brooding," she repeated. "About Miss Fraser." He didn't deny it. "Did you know she was the woman from the museum? The one I mentioned? I had my suspicions, especially after I heard about the incident at Hartley House." His aunt looked at him over her embroidery. "Jamie, what possessed you to say such things to her? And publicly?" He laughed bitterly. "Cowardice, fear. Take your pick. I don't understand." Jamie was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Then, slowly, he began to talk. He told his aunt about the museum, about the conversation that had felt like coming home. He told her about the way Adele had made him feel, seen, understood, challenged in ways he'd never experienced, and he told her about the panic that had set in afterward. "Father's voice was in my head," he said quietly. All his lessons about appropriate matches, about guarding the family name, about never letting anyone close enough to matter. And Adele mattered, Aunt B. From that first conversation she mattered. It terrified me. "So you tried to drive her away?" "So I destroyed any chance I might have had with her," Jamie corrected. "There's a difference." Lady Beatrice set down her embroidery and took his hand. "Jamie, your father was wrong about many things. He was wrong about love being weakness. He was wrong about emotional attachments. and he was certainly wrong about the importance of rank over character. I know that now. Do you? Because knowing it intellectually and believing it in your heart are two different things. She squeezed his hand gently. That young woman sat by your bedside for 3 days. She held your hand through the worst of the fever. She fought for your life when the physicians were ready to give up. Do you know what she said to you during the crisis? Jamie shook his head. She told you that you didn't get to die, that you owed her the chance to decide whether she could forgive you. Lady Beatrice smiled slightly. She's quite fierce when she wants to be. I know, Jamie said softly. It's one of the things I He stopped, the word catching in his throat. One of the things you love about her, his aunt supplied gently. Jamie closed his eyes. Yes. Then you need to tell her that. Not when you're feverish and delirious, but clearly and honestly. You need to apologize properly, explain yourself, and give her the choice of what comes next. She'll refuse to see me. Perhaps, but you owe her the attempt. You owe her the truth. Lady Beatrice stood and gathered her embroidery. And Jamie, you need to decide what you want more, your pride or a chance at happiness. It took another week before Jamie was strong enough to leave his room. Dr. Thornbury finally declared him well enough to move about the house, though he cautioned against overexertion. Jamie's first thought was to find Adele, but Lady Beatrice informed him that she had left that morning. What? Jamie felt as though he'd been struck. She's gone? Where? Back to Derbyshire with Mrs. Pickering. She said she had been away from home long enough. But I didn't. I haven't had a chance to speak with her properly. No, his aunt agreed. You haven't. Jamie sank into a chair, feeling the loss like a physical weight. I've ruined everything. Not necessarily. Lady Beatrice handed him a folded piece of paper. She left this for you. With trembling hands, Jamie unfolded the note. Adele's handwriting was clear and elegant. Your Grace, I am glad you have recovered. Dr. Thornbury assures me you will regain your full strength with time and care. I cannot stay at Greystone Manor any longer. My father needs me at home, and I have my own life to return to. I hope you understand. I want you to know that I do not regret coming when you were ill. Despite everything that passed between us, I could not have lived with myself if I had refused to help when I was needed. That says more about my character than yours, I think. I also want you to know that I have thought carefully about what you said during your fever. I understand that illness can loosen tongues and bring forth truths we normally hide. But I need you to understand something in return. Words spoken in delirium without conscious choice or consequence are not the same as words spoken in honesty and courage. If you meant the things you said, if there is truth in them, then you know where to find me. But I will not be the one to seek you out. I will not make myself vulnerable to you again unless you can prove that you have changed, that you can be brave enough to stand by your words in the light of day. The choice, Your Grace, is yours. Yours in good faith, Adele Fraser. Jamie read the letter 3 times, each word burning itself into his memory. Then he looked up at his aunt. I need to go to Derbyshire. Lady Beatrice smiled. I thought you might say that. I'll have the carriage prepared. Not the carriage, Jamie said, rising to his feet with determination he didn't quite feel. I'll ride. It's faster, and I've wasted enough time already. Jamie, you're barely recovered. I don't care. He gripped the letter tightly. She's right. She deserves honesty. She deserves courage. She deserves everything I've been too much of a coward to give her, and I'm not waiting another day. The ride to Derbyshire took 2 days, during which Jamie had plenty of time to think about what he would say when he saw Adele again. He rehearsed speeches, imagined conversations, and tried to prepare himself for every possible outcome. But when he finally arrived at the Fraser home, a handsome stone house in a small market town, all his carefully planned words fled. He dismounted stiffly. Dr. Thornbury would have been furious at him for making this journey so soon, but Jamie didn't care, and approached the front door. A stern-looking housekeeper answered his knock. I'm here to see Miss Fraser, he said. I'm the Duke of Westfield. The housekeeper's expression suggested she knew exactly who he was and what he had done. I'll inquire if Miss Fraser is receiving visitors, Your Grace. She left him standing on the doorstep. Jamie couldn't blame her for the slight. After what felt like an eternity, Magistrate Fraser himself appeared at the door. He was a solidly built man with grey hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Jamie with the same careful attention he probably gave to witnesses in his courtroom. "Your Grace," he said coolly, "this is unexpected. I need to speak with your daughter, sir. I'm not certain my daughter wishes to speak with you. I understand that, sir, but I'm asking for the chance to apologize properly, to explain." Jamie met the older man's gaze steadily. "I hurt her badly. I was cruel and cowardly. I can't undo that, but I can at least tell her the truth. After that, if she never wants to see me again, I'll respect her wishes." Magistrate Fraser studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped aside. "She's in the garden, through the house and out the back door. But your Grace..." The magistrate's voice stopped him. "If you hurt my daughter again, your title will not protect you from my wrath, am I understood?" "Perfectly, sir." Jamie walked through the comfortable, book-filled house and out into a well-tended garden, and there, sitting on a bench beneath an apple tree with a book in her lap, was Adele. She looked up at the sound of his footsteps and her eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" she asked, standing quickly. "You should be in bed, recovering." "I'm fine," Jamie said, though the ride had exhausted him more than he wanted to admit. "I needed to see you. You've seen me. Now you should go back to Greystone and rest properly." But despite her words, she didn't move away. "Adele, please, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to discuss. I think we have everything to discuss." Jamie took a step closer. "You were right in your letter. Words spoken in fever don't count. So I'm here, fully conscious and in my right mind to tell you the truth." She crossed her arms defensively. "And what truth would that be?" "That I love you," Jamie said simply. "I've loved you since the moment you corrected my Latin translation in the museum and then laughed when I tried to defend my interpretation. I loved you when you showed me your sketches and explained your theory about why the sculptor had positioned the figure that way. I loved you at Hartley House even as I said those terrible things to you." Adele's face had gone pale. "Stop! I can't stop, not anymore." Jamie's voice was raw with emotion. "I was a coward, Adele. My father raised me to believe that love was weakness, that caring for anyone was a vulnerability. And you scared me because I cared about you so much so quickly. You saw past the title and the wealth to who I actually am, and that terrified me. So I tried to destroy what we had before it could destroy me." "You succeeded," she said quietly. "You destroyed it very thoroughly. I know, and I'm not asking you to forgive me or to forget what I did. I'm just asking you to understand why." He took another step closer. "During the fever, when I was delirious, apparently all I could do was call for you. Dr. Thornbury says I wouldn't rest until you were there. Even when I wasn't conscious enough to recognize my own name, some part of me knew I needed you." Tears were sliding down Adele's cheeks now, though she made no sound. "You humiliated me in front of all of London. You made me feel worthless." "I know," Jamie said, his own voice breaking, "and I will regret that for the rest of my life. You are not worthless, Adele. You are brilliant and brave, and everything I've ever wanted in a partner. The fact that you're not from the nobility doesn't matter. What matters is that you're you, passionate about ideas, unafraid to challenge me, capable of sitting by the bedside of a man who hurt you because it was the right thing to do." "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered. "How do I know you won't hurt me again?" "You don't," Jamie admitted. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes or say stupid things. But I can promise that I will never deliberately hurt you again. I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your regard. And I can promise that I will love you, whether you choose to accept that love or not." Adele covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jamie wanted desperately to hold her, but he forced himself to stay where he was. This was her choice. He had said what he needed to say. Now he had to give her space to decide. Finally, she lowered her hands and looked at him. Her eyes were red but clear. "You said you love me," she said. "Yes. Do you know what I realized while I was sitting by your bedside?" Jamie shook his head, hardly daring to breathe. "I realized that I'm angry at you, furiously angry, because I love you too." She laughed, but it was a broken sound. "I've been trying so hard to hate you, to convince myself that what you did was unforgivable. But the truth is, I started falling in love with you in that museum, and some foolish part of me never stopped. Even when you hurt me. Even when I told myself I never wanted to see you again. Why do you think I came when you were ill? Why do you think I stayed? Hope, terrifying and exhilarating, bloomed in Jamie's chest. Adele, I'm not finished, she said firmly. Loving you doesn't mean I've forgiven you, and it doesn't mean I'm ready to trust you again. You broke something between us, Jamie. If there's any chance of repairing it, you're going to have to prove you've changed. You're going to have to show me, not just tell me, that you're brave enough to love me publicly as well as privately. I will, Jamie said immediately. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll publicly apologize to you. I'll court you properly, with your father's permission. You'll start by giving me time, Adele interrupted. You'll go back to Greystone Manor and finish recovering. You'll think carefully about what you really want, and whether you're truly ready to defy convention by marrying someone your father would have considered unsuitable. I don't care what my father would have thought. You will care, Adele said sadly. When society whispers, when your peers question your choice, when people say I'm married above my station, or that you married beneath yours, those whispers will hurt, Jamie. I need to know you can withstand them. I can, he insisted. Adele, I would face down the entire House of Lords for you. I would publish my love for you in the Times if it would help you believe me. A small, genuine smile finally touched her lips. Don't do that. One public humiliation is quite enough for our relationship. Our relationship. The words gave Jamie more hope than he had any right to feel. So what happens now? He asked carefully. Adele took a deep breath. Now you go home and recover. In 1 month, if you still feel the same way, you may write to my father and request permission to call on me formally, and we will see what develops from there. 1 month, Jamie repeated. It seemed like an eternity, but he nodded. All right. 1 month? And Adele? Yes? I want you to know something. During the fever, when I couldn't tell reality from dreams, the only thing that felt real was you, your voice, your hand in mine. You. He swallowed hard. You saved my life in more ways than one. Whatever happens between us, I will never forget that. Adele's composure cracked slightly, fresh tears gathering in her eyes, but she didn't look away from him. Go home, Jamie, she said softly. Get well, and think carefully about what you're promising. I don't need to think, he replied. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. But he went anyway, because she had asked him to, and because proving that he respected her wishes seemed like a good place to start. The month that followed was the longest of Jamie's life. He returned to Greystone Manor and focused on recovering his strength, though he chafed at the slowness of the process. Dr. Thornberry was pleased with his progress but warned him against pushing too hard. You're healing well, Your Grace, but these things take time. Patience is required. Jamie was learning patience. It was an unfamiliar virtue, but one he was determined to master. He spent his days managing a state business that had piled up during his illness and his evenings writing letters to Adele. He poured his heart onto paper, describing his days, his thoughts. His gradual understanding of all the ways his father's teaching had warped his view of love and attachment. Adele wrote back, though her letters were more guarded than his. She told him about her work with her father, about books she was reading, about the changing autumn weather in Derbyshire. But slowly, page by page, her tone softened. She began to ask him questions, to share small jokes, to let him see glimpses of the woman he had met in the museum. Lady Beatrice watched this correspondence with amusement and approval. You're becoming almost human, she teased. It's quite remarkable. I was always human, Aunt. You were always going through the motions of being human, she corrected. But now you're actually feeling things, caring about someone more than yourself. It suits you. The month ended on a bright October day. Jamie, with Dr. Thornberry's reluctant permission and accompanied by Lady Beatrice for propriety, travelled once more to Derbyshire. This time, when he knocked on the Fraser door, he was invited in immediately. Magistrate Fraser received him in his study, a room lined with law books and smelling of pipe tobacco. Your Grace, the magistrate said formally, I understand you wish to discuss my daughter. Yes, sir. Jamie had rehearsed this conversation 12 times, but now that the moment had arrived, his carefully prepared speech fled. Sir, I love your daughter. I've treated her abominably, and I don't deserve her regard, but I'm hoping to earn it. I'm asking your permission to court Adele formally, with the intention of marriage if she'll have me." Magistrate Fraser leaned back in his chair, studying Jamie with those shrewd eyes. "You're a duke. My daughter is the child of a magistrate. Society will not be kind to either of you." "I'm aware of that, sir. I don't care." "Adele will care. She'll hear every whisper, endure every slight. Are you prepared to defend her? To stand by her when your peers question your choice?" "Every single day," Jamie said firmly. "Sir, your daughter is the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She's brilliant, brave, and compassionate. The fact that society might question her suitability says everything about society's failures and nothing about hers." A small smile touched the magistrate's lips. "You've rehearsed that." "Yes, sir. But I also mean it." Magistrate Fraser was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My daughter was devastated by what you did to her in London. It took weeks before she would smile again. If I give you permission to court her, and you hurt her again, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you regret it, noble title or not." "I understand, sir, and I accept those terms." "Then you have my permission. But the real question is whether you have Adele's." He stood and opened the study door. "She's in the drawing room. Good luck, Your Grace. You're going to need it." Adele was standing by the window when Jamie entered the drawing room. She was wearing a simple green dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and her hair was arranged in the style he remembered from the museum, practical but lovely. She turned when she heard him enter, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. "Your month is up," she said. "Yes. And you're still here." "I'll always be here," Jamie said quietly. "If you'll let me." Adele moved toward him slowly, carefully, as though approaching something fragile that might break. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, about loving me, about wanting to prove you've changed." "Yes? I've also been thinking about what I want, not what society expects, not what my father advises, but what I truly want for myself." She took a deep breath. "I want honesty, Jamie. I want a partnership where we can challenge each other without fear. I want someone who values my mind as much as anything else. I want someone brave enough to love me, even when it's difficult." "I can be that person," Jamie said. "I want to be that person. For you." "Can you, though?" Adele's voice was gentle but serious. "Can you truly set aside everything your father taught you? Can you introduce me to society as you're intended without shame? Can you build a life with someone who will never be content to simply be a duchess, who will want to continue her studies, who will question and debate and probably exasperate you regularly?" Jamie reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't move, he took her hands in his. "Adele, you exasperate me already. You challenge me. You make me question assumptions I've held my entire life. You see through all my aristocratic nonsense to who I actually am underneath." He smiled slightly. "Honestly, it's terrifying, but it's also the most alive I've ever felt. So yes, I can do all of those things. In fact, I'm looking forward to it." Adele's eyes searched his face, looking for any hint of doubt or reservation. "If I agree to let you court me, if we eventually marry, I won't change who I am to suit society's expectations." "I don't want you to change. I fell in love with exactly who you are. People will say cruel things about me, about us. Let them. I've learned that the only opinions that matter are those of people we respect. And Adele, I respect you more than anyone I've ever met." She was quiet for a long moment, and Jamie forced himself to wait, to let her process, to give her the space to make her own choice. Finally, she said, "I'm going to trust you. Against my better judgment, against every instinct of self-preservation, I'm going to trust that you mean what you say. But Jamie, if you break that trust again—" "I won't," he promised. "I swear to you, Adele, I won't." "Then you may court me," she said, and a real smile, warm and genuine, finally broke across her face. "Properly and publicly. Let's see how society handles that." Jamie felt as though he could breathe properly for the first time in months. "May I—" He hesitated, not wanting to presume. "May I kiss you?" Adele's smile turned slightly mischievous. "We are not engaged, Your Grace. That would be highly improper. I've never cared much for propriety." "Clearly," she said. But she was rising onto her toes, moving closer. "Though perhaps just this once we might bend the rules slightly." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Adele's arms came up around his neck and Jamie pulled her closer, the kiss deepened into something more certain. A promise. A beginning. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Adele laughed. A real laugh, full of joy and relief and possibility. "We're going to scandalize everyone," she said. "Probably," Jamie agreed. "Does that bother you?" "Not even a little bit." And standing there in the Fraser drawing room, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows and Adele in his arms, Jamie Archer realized that he had finally learned what his father never understood, that love wasn't weakness at all. It was the bravest thing a person could do. 18 months later, the wedding took place at Greystone Manor on a brilliant May morning. Despite predictions of scandal and whispered disapproval, the event was well attended. Those who came out of genuine affection for the couple far outnumbered those who came out of curiosity or spite. Adele wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with her mother's pearls at her throat. Jamie, watching her walk toward him through the garden, where they had chosen to hold the ceremony, thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. Magistrate Fraser gave his daughter away with visible pride. Lady Beatrice wept happily in the front row. Even Dr. Thornbury, who had been invited as a special guest, looked pleased with the outcome of his most memorable case. The vows were traditional, but when it came time for Jamie to speak his promises, he added something that wasn't in the standard ceremony. "I promise to respect your mind and your independence," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. "I promise to stand with you against society's judgment. I promise to love you not despite who you are, but because of who you are. And I promise to spend every day proving myself worthy of the gift you've given me, your trust." There were murmurs among the guests, some approving, others scandalized by the departure from tradition. Adele didn't care. She squeezed Jamie's hands and spoke her own addition. "I promise to challenge you when you need it, and support you always. I promise to build a life with you that honors both duty and love. And I promise to remind you whenever necessary that true strength lies not in walls we build around our hearts, but in the courage to let them be vulnerable." When the vicar pronounced them married, Jamie kissed his wife with more enthusiasm than was strictly proper, to the laughter and applause of those who truly loved them. The wedding breakfast was held in Greystone's ballroom, the same ballroom where Lady Beatrice informed anyone who would listen the Duke had realized he was mortal after all. During the celebration, Caroline Huxley, now a close friend to both Jamie and Adele, approached the new Duchess with a champagne glass raised in toast. "I have to admit," Caroline said with a grin, "when I saw what happened at Hartley House, I never imagined it would lead to this." "Neither did I," Adele admitted, watching her new husband across the room as he conversed with her father. "But I've learned that life can be surprising." "He's different now," Caroline observed, "less forbidding. You've been good for him." "We've been good for each other," Adele corrected gently, and it was true. In the months of their courtship, Jamie had systematically introduced Adele to society, not as someone to be tolerated because of his rank, but as someone remarkable in her own right. He had defended her against subtle slights and overt rudeness, with a fierce protectiveness that had surprised even him. More importantly, he had encouraged her intellectual pursuits. When she expressed interest in writing about Roman history, he had connected her with scholars and helped her gain access to private libraries. When she wanted to attend lectures at the Royal Society, he had challenged the rule barring women from attendance, and while he hadn't yet succeeded in changing it, he hadn't given up trying. In turn, Adele had helped Jamie understand that vulnerability wasn't weakness. She had encouraged him to repair relationships his arrogance had damaged. She had shown him by patient example that opening his heart didn't mean losing control. It meant gaining something infinitely more valuable. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Jamie found Adele on the terrace, taking a moment of quiet away from the crowd. "Hiding from your own wedding breakfast, Your Grace," he teased, using her new title. "Just taking it all in," she replied, leaning into him when he wrapped his arm around her waist. "A year and a half ago I thought my life was over, and now you're stuck with me forever," Jamie finished. "Poor planning on your part, really." Adele laughed and turned to face him. "Do you know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" That night at Hartley House, what you said about me being the last woman you'd ever marry. Jamie winced. Must we relive my worst moment? Actually, yes, because I've realized something. Adele's eyes sparkled with mischief. You were right. What? I'm the last woman you'll ever marry because now you're married to me and you're not getting rid of me. Jamie stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing, a real laugh, free and unguarded. That, he said, pulling her close, is the best possible interpretation of that disaster. I thought so. They stood together, looking out over the gardens of Greystone Manor, watching their guests mingle and celebrate. In the distance, Adele could see Lady Beatrice talking animatedly with her father. She saw Dr. Thornbury being cornered by several society matrons who undoubtedly wanted to hear every detail of the Duke's dramatic illness. Do you have any regrets? Jamie asked quietly. Adele considered the question seriously. About marrying you? No. About the path that led us here? Some. I wish the humiliation at Hartley House had never happened. I wish you had been brave enough to speak honestly from the start. So do I, Jamie said fervently. But, Adele continued, I also think that we might not have appreciated this. She gestured between them. If it had come easily, we both had to change, to grow, to learn what really matters. So no, I don't regret where we've ended up, even though society still whispers about the Duke who married beneath his station. Let them whisper, Adele said firmly. We know the truth. And those who matter, those who truly care about us, they know it too. Jamie kissed her forehead gently. I love you, Adele Archer. I love you too, she replied, even though you're still occasionally insufferable. Only occasionally? He pretended to be wounded. I must be losing my touch. Adele laughed and pulled him back toward the ballroom. Come on, we should rejoin our guests before your aunt sends out a search party. As they walked back inside, Jamie reflected on how thoroughly his life had changed. The man who had once declared Adele Fraser the last woman he would marry had been right, but in a way he never could have imagined. She was the last, because she was the only one he would ever need. And as they rejoined the celebration, surrounded by people they loved, beginning a life together that would be challenging and rewarding in equal measure, both Jamie and Adele knew that they had found something rare, a love strong enough to overcome pride, brave enough to face society's judgment, and real enough to last a lifetime. 5 years later, the library at Greystone Manor had been transformed. Where once only serious tomes of lore and history had resided, now children's books shared space with scholarly works. A corner had been converted into what could only be described as organized chaos, toys scattered across a Turkish rug, a small desk covered in drawings, and a rocking horse that had belonged to Jamie's grandfather. Adele sat in a comfortable chair by the window, a book in her lap, and her spectacles perched on her nose. At her feet, a dark-haired boy of 4 was building an elaborate castle from wooden blocks. "Mama, look!" Henry James Archer, heir to the Westfield dukedom, demanded her attention. "It's Rome!" Adele smiled down at her son. "It's magnificent, darling. Tell me about it." "This is the Forum," Henry explained, with the grave seriousness only a 4-year-old can muster. "And this is the Colosseum, and this is where the Emperor lives." "Which Emperor?" came a voice from the doorway. Henry's face lit up. "Papa." He abandoned his blocks and ran to Jamie, who scooped him up easily. "How was your meeting with the estate manager?" Adele asked, setting aside her book. "Productive, though Garrett was scandalized when I suggested we convert the old barn into a school for the village children." Jamie settled into the chair next to Adele's, Henry on his lap. "Apparently, it's not done." "How shocking that you would do something that's not done," Adele said dryly. "I learned from the best," Jamie replied, leaning over to kiss her cheek. "Speaking of which, how is the manuscript progressing?" Adele's book on Roman domestic life was nearing completion. It would be published under her own name, another thing that wasn't done, but that Jamie had insisted upon. She had already received interest from several universities about lecturing, though she would have to wait until their youngest, 2-year-old, Eleanor Catherine, was older before committing to extensive travel. "It's nearly finished," Adele said, "though I'm expecting the reviews to be mixed at best. A woman writing about ancient Rome? Scandalous." "Let them be scandalized," Jamie said, echoing her words from years ago. "The scholarship is sound. That's what matters." Henry tugged on his father's sleeve. "Papa, tell me the story again." "Which story, Poppet?" "About when you were sick and Mama saved you." Jamie and Adele exchanged a look over their son's head, a look that contained years of shared history, understanding, and love. "Well," Jamie began, "it was a very long time ago. I was foolish and said some things I shouldn't have." "Very foolish," Adele interjected with a smile. "Extremely foolish," Jamie agreed. "And then I became very ill, and your mother, who had every reason to stay far away from me, came to help anyway." "Because she's brave," Henry declared. "The bravest," Jamie confirmed. "And she sat by my bedside and told me I wasn't allowed to die." "And you listened." Henry loved this part. "I did. Because one does not argue with your mother when she's made up her mind about something." Adele laughed. "That is not how the story ends." "No," Jamie agreed, his voice softening. "The story ends with me realizing that I loved her more than I loved my own pride, and with her being generous enough to forgive me and give me a second chance." "And then you got married and had me," Henry finished triumphantly. "And then we got married and had you," Jamie confirmed, "and your sister, and built this life together." Henry seemed satisfied with this ending and wriggled down to return to his blocks. As he played, singing softly to himself, Adele reached for Jamie's hand. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have gone?" she asked quietly. "If you hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't come?" "All the time," Jamie admitted. "I think about what I almost lost because of my own stupidity, and I'm grateful every single day that I got the chance to make it right." "We made it right," Adele corrected. "Both of us, together." From the nursery down the hall came the sound of Eleanor waking from her nap, her babbling turning into demands for attention. Adele started to rise, but Jamie stopped her. "I'll get her. Finish your chapter." He dropped a kiss on her head and went to collect their daughter, leaving Adele in the warm library with Henry's cheerful construction commentary providing background music to her thoughts. She had never imagined this life, Duchess of Westfield, mother, scholar, wife to a man who had once hurt her terribly, but who had spent years proving that people could change, could grow, could become better than they were. It hadn't been easy. There had been difficulties along the way, society's continued disapproval, family tensions, moments when old wounds reopened. But they had faced every challenge together, and their partnership had only grown stronger. From the nursery she could hear Jamie's voice, gentle and loving, talking to Eleanor. Henry had moved on from Rome to what appeared to be medieval England, if his narration about knights and castles was any indication. These were the moments that mattered, Adele thought. Not grand balls or society's approval, but ordinary afternoons filled with love and laughter and the family they had built together. The woman who had been publicly humiliated at Hartley House seemed like someone from another lifetime. In a way she was, that Adele had been wounded and uncertain, convinced she was somehow lacking because she didn't fit society's mold. This Adele, Lady Westfield, wife, mother, soon-to-be published author, knew her own worth, and she had a husband who not only recognized that worth but celebrated it every single day. Jamie returned with Eleanor, who immediately demanded to see her brother's creation. As their children played together, Jamie returned to his seat beside Adele. "Happy?" he asked softly. Adele looked at her family, the impossible family that had grown from heartbreak and humiliation and the stubborn refusal of two proud people to give up on each other. "Completely," she said, and she was. The end. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We truly hope it touched your heart and reminded you that even the deepest wounds can be healed when love is real and brave enough. If you felt something while listening, please consider subscribing, liking, leaving a comment and sharing this video. Your support helps us continue creating emotional stories filled with love, redemption, and beautiful surprises. At the end of this video, another story suggestion will appear. Click and continue this emotional journey with us. You never know which tale might become your new favorite. Thank you for being here. The Legends of the Fall Team.